precisely, precisely because we fail so spectacularly to uphold these fictions and therefore expose those definitional parameters of success as fictions. Rather than lament and mourn how much we fail or how badly we fail, we should instead revel in the spectacularity of our capacity to fail. And these are Halberstam's words. Quote, "To live is to fail, to bungle, to disappoint, and ultimately to die. Rather than searching for ways around death and disappointment, the queer art of failure involves the acceptance of the finite, the embrace of the absurd, the silly, and the hopelessly goofy. Rather than resisting endings and limits, let us instead revel in and cleave to all of our inevitable fantastic failures," end quote. This deliberate decision to revel in failure, to cleave to it, is what I hope to encourage you all to do over the few days. If we take the activist history and commitment of Crip seriously, to claim Crip is precisely to take up the project Halberstam calls for, to embrace our failures to live up to the expectations of compulsory able-body-mindedness. We fail to navigate space. We fail to perform labor. We fail to maintain the pace of life expected of us. This is central to the concept of Crip time, or as Alison Kafer beautifully describes it, quote, "Rather than bend disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, Crip time bends the clock to meet disabled bodies and minds," end quote. Rather than force our body minds to comply, we inhabit precisely where our body minds fail to do so. I want to be clear that I'm by no means the first person to apply Halberstam's queer art of failure to Crip experience. For example, Leah Lakshmi Piepsana Samarasinha in Care Work, Dreaming Disability Justice invokes Halberstam's concept to describe disability justice as a project full of failure that emerges precisely from Crip experience. Quote, "Disability justice, when it's really happening, is too messy and wild to really fit into traditional movement and nonprofit industrial complex structures because our bodies and minds are too wild to fit into those structures. The real deal is messy and beautiful and real, as messy and beautiful and real as our body minds," end quote. No project of justice can be grounded only in success. Rather, it is how much Crips have failed and have been seen as failures that open up new possibilities and strategies for living Crip and queer. The issue here is that ableism and ideologies of compulsory able-body-mindedness tend to suppress and obscure such possibilities. To me, this is where poetry has much to offer. So what does this mean for we who are committed to creative success? I've said this to a lot of my friends and colleagues over the years, but I truly believe we are in a golden age of disability literature, as so many disabled writers are being published and recognized for their contributions. Disability poetics is being taken seriously as not just a signifier of disabled poetry by and about disabled people, but also as a field of study and a set of innovations. I've seen more disability-centered issues and features at literary journals, more disabled editors joining mastheads, more disability-centered publications. This, of course, raises significant questions about disability's tokenism, where it suddenly has become trendy to both publish the quote-unquote underrepresented voices of disabled people and to claim Crip identity as a form of marginalization that makes one's work more publishable. We can certainly talk about the more problematic aspects of this recent trend, but honestly, I'm really uninvested in adjudicating who gets to claim Crip. I instead want to think about what this recent visibility of disability writing creates in terms of pressures on individual creators to not only be constantly producing in a publish or perish mode in order to stay relevant, but also in terms of how many people have unfortunately come to define their identity as Crip writers based on whether or not they're able to publish and where they are able to publish. I'm aware that those who know my work may find this a completely ironic statement, given that I've had the repeated privilege of being published, but it is not lost on me that so much of identifying as a disabled writer often feels like meeting the requirement that you publish in prestigious places and publish constantly. And regardless of how long you've been writing or how many times you've been published, it seems like the grind never ceases, but actually even intensifies. No wonder so many of us burn out. As a means of demystifying this illusion so often perpetuated by the hyper-visible lives we live via social media, I want to emphasize the fact that so much of my writing career, especially in its earliest moments, has been characterized by failure. I've had editors tell me that my work is neither queer, nor disabled, nor Asian enough to check off the boxes of diversity or quote unquote otherness that the journal wanted to claim. Would they ever do this to a cis, white, able-bodied-minded writer with cultural capital? I've had to rehearse my trauma in ways that make me legible enough for publication. I've had editors offer entirely unsolicited advice about my work to purge it of its preoccupation with embodiment and disability because it either isn't publishable or too negative. I've had fellow poets deny the validity of my work as fraudulent, or in the most ungenerous of readings, merely amateur imitation that is really a series of failed attempts to rebrand myself as some sort of scholar poet when I never went through the workshop system. In fact, a year or two into sending out my work, I began keeping, and still do, an active log of everything I've sent out. And I can say with certainty, and I'm not lying to you, that over 80 to 90% of those submissions have ended in rejection. I know this already sounds like familiar advice. Try and accumulate as many rejections as you can to keep yourself constantly submitting, and eventually you'll land that yes that makes it all worthwhile. But this process can be grueling, demoralizing after a while. A constant encounter with rejection that makes you question your legitimacy as a writer and the value of your experiences being translated into literary form. This I know very intimately, and for the editors that took a chance on my work, I am most grateful. Yet, I think failure catalyzed a profound set of conversations I began to have with myself that I began to extend to a circle of people I trusted with my work and with my craft. These are the kinds of questions I've been asking myself. What were the experiences, sensations, feelings, histories I wanted to engage with in my work, and why? Who was I speaking to in my work, and who did I feel accountable to? Whose work do I respect, and have I invested enough in the work of the community in which I am claiming membership? I realized very quickly that my own experience of not being welcomed in traditional workshop spaces during my undergraduate career greatly impacted my formation as a poet. I was, like so many young poets, defensive of my work and only able to conceive of my work, as my truths to be told in verse. But I've since come to understand my work as, in fact, deeply relational. I'm indebted to, in dialogue with, and in solidarity with those who made possible the very articulations of Crip experience that I claim as my own now. It always astounds me when I hear fellow writers say they don't really read the work of others or do so only to find models to imitate. It reduces the valuable work of reading to something utilitarian when it in fact offers a powerful opportunity to build a sense of reflexivity or reflection about your own work and its situatedness in the very cultures that suffuse and shape it into being. Let me be very clear. I don't think it's wrong at all for you to read for inspiration or insist on your work as deeply personal and about your individual experience. I'm instead inviting you to think about your work as having responsibilities to others, as inevitably public, even in its most private incarnations. Think of this as an extended way to think about audience, potential interlocutors, potential kin, potential collaborators. I am deeply influenced here by feminist traditions, here exemplified by Sarah Ahmed, who in her incredible book, Living a Feminist Life in 2017, describes citation as, quote, feminist memory. Citation is how we acknowledge our debt to those who came before, those who helped us find our way when the way was obscured because we deviated from the paths we were told to follow. And those were Sarah Ahmed's words. Whether or not your work directly references the work of others, your engagement with a literary tradition is inherently citational in that it invokes what has been made legible as disabled experience and writing. Our responsibility as a community is to preserve not just our experiences as disabled people, but also our connections to the past, because ableism so often depends on our forgetting. When we refuse to see ourselves in relation to Crip kin, to Crip history, we facilitate the cruel project of ableism in its gleeful erasure of who we are. In my writing practice, I've also come to embrace failure as a way of sharpening what my writing aims to do. I used to spend a lot of time deleting and purging in my work, a kind of whittling down to what I thought merited the right to remain. But now I tend to keep everything, even if it means collecting what gets edited out into a separate document, because they may well serve the foundations for new work forged out of failed attempts. These bits and pieces pared away sometimes need to be made to help you arrive at what you're actually invested in or actually trying to do. So much of how I arrived at the Crip forms of poetry that constitute my work now came from failing spectacularly at received forms. I find highly regulated forms like the sestina or the pantoum or the sonnet quite difficult precisely because of my brain fog and neurodivergence. But that doesn't preclude the value of an attempt, even if the outcome is utter failure. As a mentor of mine once said, why does a publication suddenly make what felt like a failure into success? We don't need this legitimacy to find personal value in failed projects that maybe have yet to find their moment or need a different set of conditions to be realized. So much of failure is contextual. Failed perhaps only for now, but always bearing possibility and potential in new situations. So, over the course of the next few days, next few months, next few years, I invite you to commit to embracing failure as formative rather than destructive. Make failure a practice. Fail on your own, fail together, fail in public, fail with grace. I'll spare you the usual cliches and instead gesture in closing to the words of Mary Lisa Johnson, which still sit with me. In her own struggles with capacity and debility, Johnson understands her failures to, quote, have led me to this place of Crip willfulness, which sounds like a mean place of stubborn resistance, but feels like a calm relinquishing of fantasies that I can force things, situations, bodies, emotions, sensations to be other than they are. It is a refusal to insist, a refusal to act in accordance with the system of compulsory able-bodiedness that requires individuals to mask, suppress, and disregard discomfort in the process of determining what is possible, of what we are capable. And those are Mary Lisa Johnson's words. So much of Crip experience is this sense of refusal born out of a constant failure to accept a world not made for us. The only way we arrive at a sense of Crip willfulness that can powerfully animate our writing and thinking is through an embrace of the failures that got us here in the first place. Rather than disavow failure, we need to see it as a starting place for generative possibility. This is in line with the very spirit of Crip and the social justice movements that underpin it. It is from this that our poetics springs. Here's to our collective project of continued failure. I'm looking forward to failing alongside you. And for the remaining time that I have, I'd love to do a Q&A and answer any questions that you all have. So thank you all so much for listening. Connie, Sheila, or Salim, if you don't mind, because I can't, I'm not on the desktop version or laptop of Zoom, I can't see all the questions. So if people have...
I was gonna say, we can read them for you. And then I was gonna suggest to everyone, write your questions for Travis in the chat and we'll do the sort of translation. and
Thank
come
you.
back and forth. And I think that
Is it possible, this is Salim, for folks to click the Q&A button? That way we can track and make sure that if something's been answered, if we run out of time, we can pass those questions on to Travis. So the
that's
Q&A
great.
button is on the bottom of your screen to the left of your chat icon.
Yes.
We'll also read them out loud to you, Travis.
And you can also send Travis just your comments if you'd like.
Yeah,
because I think that would be nice.
Thank you so much.
Well, Priyanka says, thank you, Travis. That was amazing.
Thank you so much. The warm comments, I really appreciate them. Thank you so much.
And Tia says, thank you, Travis. That was incredible. So I think this definitely theme of failure, Travis, resonated a lot.
If I could read one question to you, Travis, from Rita. The question is, can you recommend a poetry collection that speaks to the complexities of masking?
Masking. Can I ask for clarification? Do you mean masking in a metaphorical sense, or do you mean this in a kind of literal sense, as in COVID? I think this is actually a really interesting question. I can think about it more in terms of metaphor, but in terms of masking, literal masking, I'm not quite sure I actually have one in mind. But I can think of many poetry collections that are thinking about masking metaphorically. I'm thinking of a lot of queer poets thinking about what passing means. And passing is a concept that I've been thinking a lot about over these years. What does it mean to pass as able-bodied? What does it mean to pass as Crip? I'm thinking so much of the work of people that I love and admire. I know Meg Day is in the audience, and I know Meg has sort of really talked about this issue in terms of passing as hearing, or what gets to be legible as disability. And yes, I think I saw someone in the chat say Kay's work. I'm like, yes, literally, Kay is the person I would have thought about. There's so many people here, I think that could actually speak to this far better than I can. But I think the issue of disability masking, or to repress, suppress, or mask disability for the purposes of either ableist survival on the one thing, or doing so because there are reasons, intersectional reasons why someone cannot express their disability in legible ways. I think this is a really important question we need to think about. And for me, where it really gets important is when there's forms of lateral ableism, where people want to create a hierarchy of disabilities based on what disabilities are more legible than others. I think there's a real ethical problem about sort of validating visible disabilities, or quote unquote apparent or legible disabilities, as more worthy of care and respect than others. So yeah, for me, whenever I think about masking, I think about the ethics of who gets to pass and who gets recognized as legibly disabled.
Thank you, Travis. We have another question that just came in from Genevieve. All right, that's just my mustache talking. It says, thanks for this vulnerable talk. Will you please tell us more about your free verse writing process if set forms don't work for you?
Yeah, what a great question. So I kind of have two ways of answering this. The first is, I remember I was in high school and I was part of this, what really felt like an unnecessarily competitive creative writing course. And all of my colleagues in that course were absolutely obsessed with metrically difficult and structurally difficult poetic structures. Everyone wanted to write a sestina. Everyone wanted to write an Alexandrine. And I found myself really at a loss, because I found those forms to be really hard to do. They were confining my thought in ways that were not productive. So I found myself, I think historically, just really, really at odds with these kinds of highly regulated forms. So for me, it was a response to the weird peer pressures applied upon me to sort of live up to what are like proper poetic forms. So I moved to free verse, and I think many contemporary poets will describe themselves as feeling more at home with free verse, just sort of given poetic history. But for me, I think free verse allowed me to come up with forms of poetry that are true to my experience. So some of you may know some of my poems. They don't take conventional stanza and line breaks, but they are, I put slashes, not where line breaks should be, but I typically put a line break precisely when pain arrives at the scene of my writing. So I live with scoliosis related disabilities. So one of the ways that I try to honor that process is rather than do line breaks by meaning or by sense, I do so based on where my pain is and whether or not my pain enters at that moment of writing that line. So sometimes I inhabit that space to do justice to my pain, but other times I kind of enjoy the more traditional stanza form. But that's such a great question. I think free verse for me has been, in a very true sense of that word, liberating. But I'm also aware now that really like formalist, I'm thinking of Suray's work. Suray is a true formalist. And I think the way Suray talked about form was that it allows you to sort of contain your thoughts and meet the challenge of what that container does. And I've always been such an admirer of people who can really do complicated forms, because you have to think very dynamically about your content and how that form is going to translate that content.
Excellent.
Thank you.
There's another question here.
I was going to do Liv's question next. Is that the one?
Yeah, is that all right? Yeah, that's what I was going to.
Perfect.
Okay. So Liv is asking, this is a great question too. Travis, what are your feelings about reclaiming the word crip as an academic category in creating that lateral hierarchy of the disabled people who are listened to?
You've asked one of perhaps the most troubling questions in disability studies, where I've really seen a range of scholars identify themselves as scholars of disability scholars, or Crip scholars. And I want to sort of foreground two things. Disability studies has a lot to reckon with in terms of not only its whiteness, but the ways that it has really evacuated disability and Cripness from lived experience. And I think we're having a moment now where critical disability studies and Crips of color critique actively pushing back against the way that the field has typically presumed white subjects, and primarily white subjects with physical disabilities, rather than invisible disabilities. And this reckoning, I think, is happening not just in disability studies, but also in the poetry world too. I'm not to sort of do a plug for the second volume of Beauty is a Verb, as we're—
No, do it.
We are, as an editorial collective, really committed to having those reckonings at the editorial level, but also in the content level. So who gets to conceive themselves as a poet with disabilities, or what does it mean to think about poetics as a Crip project? And I want to be really clear. Crip now is getting used in all sorts of reductive ways, just like the word queer is being used as a kind of umbrella term for anything that is non-normative. But we have to remember that Crip has an activist history. And every time I hear Crip being used as a purely intellectualized term that disregards that history, it's really telling to me the ways in which once a field becomes essentially institutionalized by universities or higher education, there's this necessary kind of amnesia that happens where this activist history gets pushed to the side. And I think disability studies is precisely the place that we can start to push back against this impulse, right? Once it gets sort of taken up by the academy, all of the most activist elements of disability hearing. And I think this is where poetry and Crip Lit is doing some of the most important work by pushing back against the ways that disability is being intellectualized as only theory, but not actually praxis. So I have really strong feelings about this, and I really appreciate that question, because I think really at the heart of what we do as disabled creatives is reminding people that you cannot have theory without lived experience, period.
Good to hear.
Thanks
you want to
so
do
much.
the next one, Celine?
Meg's, we field Meg's question next.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep, go for it.
Oh, no, you go. I thought you were going to do it.
I was, but okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just leaning forward. Interesting. You go ahead.
Oh, nice. Okay, I can do it too. Hi, Travis. Thank you for this powerful opening talk. This is Meg Day. Oh, I'm reading this. I wonder if you can share with us a little bit about how you think poets and writers here at Zoeglossia this week can best participate in this golden age uprising of disability, deaf, and Crip literature.
Meg, it's so great that you're in this audience, and I'm so glad that you're a part of this project. I think in terms of participation, I want to sort of frame my response in one way first and then in another way. So the first is everyone is already participating in that project right now, right? The fact that we're in dialogue means you're doing that work of participation. So don't feel like publication or producing a piece of writing is the only sort of ticket into participating. The second way I would respond to this is, I think rather than sort of overemphasize the word participation, which kind of presumes a kind of active or sort of productive mode of being, I'd like to think more about intention, right? So if you're entering into a workshop space or you're producing something, what is your intention for that? And what are your contributions for? Something that I emphasize in my talk is who are you accountable to? I was really troubled over these recent years to see sort of, and this is no fault of these particular poets, but young poets who see themselves as sort of talking about the sort of universal truth of their experience and wanting to sort of speak for a community. But I think that comes from this impulse to sort of reclaim one's voice, which is, I think, a really ethically important one. But I find a great value now to really talk about what your intentions are in terms of the community you're writing for and claiming membership in. So if you're writing for the other members of Zoeglossia, to other disabled people out there in the world, I think being accountable to them and understanding how your work is accountable to me is a really important form of participation. And I think, Meg, you've modeled for me precisely what that means in terms of what poetry's ethical responsibilities are. And I think if we're all sort of working from that place of ethical reflection, I think that is, to me, what makes the most golden disability literature period that I can think of.
Thanks so much. Can we, sorry, let me just pin Joe. Okay, can we do Ricky's question?
Yeah, I think that's great. Ricky put a question in the chat and it's trying to find it. He said, thank you for your powerful insights, Travis. And I can't read all the nice remarks everyone's made, but there's so many. I appreciate the suggestion to dwell with failure and let it teach us. Can you talk a little about how revision works for you after rejection?
Ricky, it's so lovely to be in dialogue with you. I know we've worked in different ways when I was still with the Deaf Poet Society. And I also just want to offer some love and support. I know you've had a harrowing few years with your well-being and with your family. So my heart goes out to you. To answer your question, the funniest thing is, if people who know me well know that I'm a terrible editor, in the sense that I am really bad at sort of being objective about what things I need to do to make my work better. And for me, the best way I know to respond to this question is to think about revision again as not an individual project, but a relational one. So I oftentimes now, I'm very selective about who I share my work with, especially if it's in a place of a formative place of change or revision. I try now to really think about, rather than just my own voice coming back over and over again to a particular piece, how is it being read by others? And how is it being read by people I really trust and respect? And I've been talking to graduate students all day at a conference I was at earlier today about how important it is to cultivate networks of mentorship and support, where you really do have a core group of people. When you share your work, you feel like you can trust them to give you a sense of the work that you're doing, and sometimes ask you the tough questions about, why is this line here? Or why is it structured in this way? I feel like I waited a long time to do that. I was really afraid of sharing my work because I didn't know what to do with criticism. I was afraid of failing in public. But being able to do that, being able to have at least people you trust guide you in your process of revision, to me is when it becomes the most productive, at least for me, rather than sort of revising on my own without a direction, which to me is really terrifying and makes me feel sort of futile in my attempts because I'm not sure I'm really doing sort of the right thing for the project I'm pursuing. But what a great question. I feel like people in the audience who teach revision or in sort of creative writing classrooms will have far better and more sophisticated things to say than I would.
right. Any other questions, guys?
Sheila, did we get Genevieve's question?
No, Genevieve's question, I saw it earlier and it's Genevieve's question's wonderful. It's, can you talk about embodied process? Is that correct, Genevieve?
I thought Genevieve was saying, talk about an embodied process, exclamation mark. Thank you. But I didn't know if that was question mark. Thank you. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you bringing that back up. Oh, it was just a thanks, Genevieve said.
It was just a thanks for talking about embodied process,
Shit.
which is interesting.
Carol has a great question, which I was hoping somebody would ask. What poetry are you reading? What's on your list? These are not,
oh my God.
These don't have to be no pressure like public endorsements, you know, blah, blah, blah. But what's moving you right now?
This is such a great question, and one that I think a lot of the spirit of where this talk came from in terms of my shock and dismay when I hear fellow creatives say, I just don't read the work of contemporary poets or the people that they're writing alongside. I find it to be such a missed opportunity. And I feel like I'm trying to sort of live the ethics that I'm preaching by really committing to reading very widely. Lately, I've been reading a lot of works by folks of color. I've been revisiting a collection by Chen, which is probably the first book that I ever reviewed publicly. And I've been thinking a lot about how writers write about intersections and not just sort of use intersectionality as a kind of buzzword, but actually instantiated in their poetics. So thinking about how Chen's queerness and Chinese American experience really sort of mold and blend. I've been really sort of interested in sort of seeing how this works out. I'm a huge fan of Aracelis Girmay's work. In fact, I can't show you now, but I have one of Aracelis's lines tattooed on my arm. I've been thinking a lot about poetic traditions that are not my own as well. I've been thinking about poetry and translation, as well as poetic traditions like Black feminist poetic traditions that inform a lot of my scholarship, but I have been really sort of been invited to think about how it can shape my creative practice. So thinking about Dion Brand, June Jordan, all of these really brilliant people who are teaching me a lot about what it means to recover histories that I didn't feel like were my own or that were alienating for me to explore. But at the end of the day, I find myself really drawn to poets interested in embodiment, of course, but also desire. I think I've talked about in many other places my love for HIV/AIDS poets. So I've been revisiting a lot of Tom Gunn's The Man with Night Sweats, as well as Paul Manette's collection, Love Alone. Both that were just so moving in terms of how they taught me to write about grief, but also about body embodiment and loss.
Great answer.
We got two more that I'm super excited about. Oh, now we got a third coming in. Okay, y'all warming up. So one that's been sitting in the chat for a minute, which apologies for not seeing, it was a Proust related question. And I want to make sure I get it. Would love to hear Travis's thoughts on Proust as a Crip queer writer, if this is something he's considered. Crip poetics of Proust, ?
I was not ready for that question, and that one's a big one. I was told so I have the great gift of getting to read a little bit of Proust in graduate school. I'm trying to remember the name of this critic. He just passed away. Oh my goodness. He wrote the essay, Is the Rectum a Grave? Oh my gosh, it'll come back to me, and people in the chat probably. Yes, Leo Bersani. Oh my goodness. So Leo just passed away, and I will always remember Leo saying something to me that to this day, I still think about all the time. Proust is a kind of writer that you read at certain points in your life that profoundly change based on your sort of lived experience and just how much life you've lived. The short answer of what I would say is I feel like I haven't lived enough life yet to read Proust in its entirety, and let alone Proust's long work. But I think your question about whether or not we would think of Proust as a queer Crip writer, I'm really interested in this move of recovering queer Crip writers in history and what happens when we do so, right? So a kind of naive way of doing that is, let's point to a writer in the past and say that they're disabled and be done in terms of their representation. But I think there's something really powerful about, and this is related to how I framed it in my talk, claiming kinship with queer Crip writers that came before us. How is our work in dialogue with them, rather than us simply claiming them for ourselves as queer and Crip? Think about what it means to have them be queer and Crip, and even what the problems are, right? I think about some of Proust's own views ideologically and politically that we may not actually think is appropriate to sort of really think about as part of our Crip movement, but being sort of honoring that work on its own terms, I think is really important. So I think your question is really interesting.
We have Kay and then Kamisha's question. Do you want to do either of those, Sheila?
I'll do Kay's. Kay, for some reason, my question thing is floating off my screen, so I kind of have to guess at the last words. But here's what Kay wrote. Love your talk and your writing, Travis. This is Kay. When we discuss failure for you, what are your strategies for aftercare when faced with an onslaught of immense rejection? Any snacks or non-poetry strategies you turn to?
Oh, I love, Kay, that you turned to care, and care is a way of thinking of responding to failure. I've been a big fan of your IG stories and your TikToks that are about care and about lived experience. So my response to that, so my kind of funny response is, I'm a big kettle chip person. So there will be bags of kettle chips that get devoured as I'm writing. So if you leave them within sight, I will finish an entire bag or more. But the maybe more serious answer is, again, thinking about the people that you trust. So I find that I fall into the worst of my melancholy and feelings of like true failures as a human when I'm left to deal with failure by myself. I start to perpetuate all of those narratives that have been told to me. I internalize them and I think about them as my own fault. So for me, I've been making a lot of concerted efforts to really process those failures with other people, not just to sort of have this kind of competition of who's failed more or whose failure feels more severe, but really think about the ways in which our failures are felt and shared as experiences. What does it mean to have failed together in some way? What does it mean to fail in a way that someone resonates with because they failed in the past in that way? And I feel like having those vulnerable people I trust, it's been really moving. One, because it makes me practice how to be vulnerable in public with others, but also allows me to connect with people that I love and care about in ways that I honestly couldn't without sharing those experiences. So I don't mean to sort of harp on this relational thing too much, but I find there's so much joy now in my life sharing those experiences of failure, pain, and grief with the people I care most about. I mean, doing something like this in which I'm getting to chat with people that I owe my career to in so many ways is surreal to me, and it means so much.
Thanks. Kamisha's question. This one I've been thinking about. One of my 7-year-old twins just got teased last week pretty bad, so we're still thinking about this. It says, great talk, Travis. When I think about failure, I think about shame. Can you talk a bit about navigating shame in order to embrace the gifts of failure?
Oh, Kamisha, you have always been, since the beginning of us working together, have always asked the most incisive and I think poetic questions. So this is a really great point. And I want to think a little bit about my personal experience identifying as a queer person as well as a Crip person. And I think shame was really at the heart of it. I grew up in a primarily Catholic Chinese American household with a lot of immigrant pressures to succeed in the ways that we've talked about over these years in terms of being a model minority, but also expected to succeed in ways that never really deal with failure, but merely sweep it away, and never talk about things like mental health and the consequences of what it means to fail. And I think it took until I started to realize that I was failing in all the ways that my parents and my extended family feared, that it took until those moments of realization for me to recognize that I was never going to succeed in the ways that they wanted. In fact, their metric of success was what they wanted success to be, not success on my own terms. So it actually was a byproduct of failure that allowed me to think about rejecting and pushing aside shame. Shame is a really, it's an intimate feeling of individualism, right? One's own shame. It's a thing that we describe as being within us and that we carry with us. And I think that the truth is, I held the most shame when I was committing to the ideas of success that people who, for all intents and purposes, did not have my best interests in mind. That's where the shame was. When I relinquished that, I realized that that's where there wasn't any shame anymore, because I wasn't held to the standards of their success or what they thought my version of success should be. So I know that sounded a little bit airy and theoretical, but I think that's important.
That was wonderful. I really related to that, Travis. You should, it's something I think we've all kind of gone through.
Yeah, I'm coming up with a 7-year-old version translation of that right now, Travis. So I appreciate it. I'm trying to translate that.
Okay.
How are we on time, Sheila and
Yeah.
Tommy?
We are pretty we've overdone our time, but in a good way. We are 18 minutes overtime, but in a good way. Thank you, everybody. Is there any last thoughts anybody would like to share? I thought this was a really Travis, thank you. This was incredible. And I think it's such a rich, sort of resonant topic. I think especially for disabled people, because we're sort of defined as failures kind of out of the gate, I think. And so it's something I think and shame of that and the passing of that and the struggling with that is something we've all kind of grappled with. Everything that was talked about tonight, Salim, I think you thought I was trying to interrupt you because I was literally just leaning forward going, yes, I believe this too. Yes, So thank you very much. And I think that we're just really grateful. It was really wonderful. And somebody said that if anyone needs me, I'll be reading. This is such a fantastic comment. Hold on. It's somebody wrote, if anyone needs me, I'll be reading everything Travis has ever written. And I know who wrote that.
Liv.
Liv. Thank you, Liv. We'll let your comment close out the night. Liv, that's wonderful. I feel the same way. So thank you guys. We're very grateful to you. And we're very excited about the next few days and what they'll bring.
I'm looking forward to all of the creative failures ahead. And please, Sheila, Connie, Salim, feel free to circulate my email to anyone who wants to chat and follow up. I'm happy. My inbox is yours.
That's so nice. Thank you.
Have the rest of your retreat. I wish I could participate in more ways, but I am literally at the end of my semester. So the curse of the academic schedule is in the way. But I send my best to all of you. And thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Need to end recording before we leave the.
What was that?
Oh, I just said, do we need to end recording before we leave? I just want to make sure we're going to end recording. That's all.
Oh, it'll end automatically and it'll be on the cloud.
Okay.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Matt.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Be well. Take care.
Have a
nice day.
great night. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.